Do you love movies? So do I. What's up, y'all? It's KB, and I love movies, inviting you to listen to The Conversation, a film podcast where passion meets perspective and opinion. From the old school to the new, I invite a guest on to discuss the movies that thrill us, challenge us, break our hearts, or even blow our minds. There's always new episodes dropping wherever you get your podcasts. So join the conversation. We don't just watch movies. We love talking about them too. The Conversation with KB Loves Movies, a part of Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.
Hey, this is Jason Kleberg from the Force 5 podcast, a show that forces a guest to come up with a movie-themed top 5 list topic, and then we reveal our picks on air. Top 5 heist films, top 5 tearjerkers, top 5 movie dogs. Every show you'll be asking yourself, what would be on my list? Guests include directors, screenwriters, actors, podcasters, musicians, authors, and even a professional wrestler. Subscribe to the Force 5 podcast, and you won't just be a listener, you'll be a list nerd. The Force 5 podcast, available wherever you're listening now.
Hello, listeners. This is Mark. I just wanted to post a little content warning at the beginning of this episode. Wake Up Heavy has not really courted controversy up to this point, but this may be a slightly controversial episode because we are discussing a Roman Polanski film. The day that my guest and I recorded this episode, Polanski won the Caesar for his latest film amid walkouts and protests. Polanski is a controversial and troubling public figure, and although Polanski's personal life doesn't get discussed in the episode, if you have issues with him and his body of work, I would strongly suggest skipping this episode. Whatever you decide to do during this time, I would like to say stay safe, stay home, don't be a spreader, and self-isolate.
C'est not Simone Choule. I'm Trelkovsky.
Welcome to Wake Up Heavy, the world's greatest horror movie podcast.
Hello, and welcome to Wake Up Heavy, Recollections of Horror. This is Mark Begley, your host. And today on this episode, I am joined by film journalist Anya Stanley. Anya Stanley's work has been seen in Birth, Movies, Death, Rue Morgue, Dread Central, and several other film publications. She's currently a columnist for Fangoria, exploring horror from a gendered perspective. Her recent article at Birth, Movies, Death, Who Gives a Shit If the Oscars Don't Respect Horror, is a masterclass in smart, witty, insightful writing about the horror genre's place in film culture. For this episode, we will be discussing the 1976 film The Tenant, directed by Roman Polanski, who also stars as Trelkovsky, a mild-mannered office clerk looking for an apartment in Paris during a housing shortage. He finds a not-quite-vacant room in an American-owned building. The former tenant, Simone Choule, attempted suicide by jumping out of the apartment's window and is hanging by a thread in a local hospital. Once the apartment becomes available, Trelkovsky moves in, and his life becomes a living nightmare. Much like Polanski himself and Roland Topor, who wrote the source novel, Trelkovsky is a Polish Jew who has immigrated to Paris. His otherness becomes a source of derision for his neighbors, the apartment's management, the police, his co-workers, and even the denizens of a local cafe. Trelkovsky becomes convinced that everyone is trying to change him into Simone Choule and make him suffer the same fate. Are they trying to change him, or is it all in his head? The screenplay was written by Polanski and frequent collaborator Gerard Brock. The film also stars Isabelle Adjani as Stella, Melvin Douglas as Monsieur Z, Shelley Winters as the concierge, and Joe Van Fleet as Madame Diaz, with cinematography from Sven Nykvist and an amazing score by Philippe Sard.
Paris. On a quiet street, in an old building, a dead woman's vacant apartment is waiting. Waiting for the tenant. Roman Polanski is the tenant. In Chinatown, he exposed the dark side of corruption. In Repulsion, he explored a warped mind. In Rosemary's Baby, he examined the occult. Now, the tenant, something altogether new, altogether chilling. No one does it to you like Roman Polanski. The Tenant, a Roman Polanski film, coming from Paramount Pictures.
Okay, so we are speaking with Anya Stanley today. Thank you very much for being on the show, Anya.
Hi, thank you for having me.
And when was the first time you saw The Tenant, and what was your initial impression?
Okay, so I only saw The Tenant just a couple of years ago because I'm not a cool cinephile. So I only got to it. It was a blind spot for years and years and years, and I had only addressed it just a couple of years ago. My boyfriend actually had a DVD of it, and I borrowed it. He said, "Oh yeah, I bet you would. It's probably really good upon a revisit." And he had assumed that I had already seen it. And I was like, "Yeah, totally, yeah." But it was actually my first time seeing it. But yes, I saw it just a couple of years ago, and the first time I saw it, the only other film of Polanski's that I had seen before that, actually two, I saw Chinatown and Rosemary's Baby. And Rosemary's Baby is one of my favorite horror films of all time. So I had high hopes for the movie, and I wasn't expecting it to be as low-key satirical as the movie was. There's quite a bit of black comedy in this movie, and he seems to be talking more about society and French society than gender in this movie, and that caught me off guard. And so once I got into the groove of that, then I could get into the movie, and I was able to hang on to it until the end.
So it didn't bite you right away as a favorite?
Not right away, no. But after the first couple of times I watched it, I chewed on it, and I found myself thinking about it more and more. And I feel like that alone is a mark of a really good movie, or at least a really impactful one that you just can't stop thinking about in the days following.
Have you seen Repulsion since?
I have seen Repulsion since, and that one is one of my favorites. Absolutely. I wouldn't quite put it above Rosemary's Baby, but I would put it above The Tenant, certainly. Even in saying that I think that The Tenant is one of the weaker films of the Apartment trilogy, it's still for me, it's still a 5-star film. It's almost like asking which Tarantino movie is his worst. They're all great movies. To me, he hasn't made a bad movie yet. Or like Paul Thomas Anderson, or there are certain filmmakers where even their quote unquote worst movies are still stellar masterpieces.
Right, their worst are better than most others' best.
Exactly. And I think that The Tenant is no different.
Yeah, I think I saw it, I want to say in the early 90s. It was the harder one to find of the Apartment trilogy. And I know that my local video store did not have a copy. I think I had to kind of branch out and go to one of the bigger chains in town. And I just remember that it sort of mixed up for me with Barton Fink when that won at Cannes, because Polanski was the head juror that year. And a lot of people were saying, well, this kind of makes sense because it's a lot like his Apartment trilogy. And of course, I had seen Rosemary's Baby because that was readily available. And I believe I had seen Repulsion in a film class in college, and finally tracked down The Tenant. When it was over, I thought, this has a lot of the stuff that I really like in it, but it sort of seemed like it was just a gender-flipped Repulsion to me. So I didn't hit me as one of my top Polanskis either. But it soon became, again, like you said, I kept thinking about it and would rent it from time to time. And every time I rented it, I enjoyed it much more. And I don't know, I think I would probably place it second in the Apartment trilogy right after Rosemary's Baby. And it probably swaps places with Repulsion.
Oh, wow.
Depending on my mood. So.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
It's either second or third in that group. But I was thinking maybe that's a good place to start with those similarities and differences between the three films in the so-called Apartment trilogy.
Do you still feel like that it's a sort of gender flip Repulsion? I never thought about it that way, but yeah, that does make sense as like a first reaction.
Well, when I think about the similarities of the three films, and this is what, I mean, you know, he didn't set out to make the Apartment trilogy. We just kind of, as viewers, have lumped them together over so many decades.
Right.
And when I think of the three together, I think it shares a little more in common with Repulsion than Rosemary's Baby.
Yes.
And just there's a few things. I just rewatched Repulsion real quickly before today. There are some silly similarities like bumping of heads. In both, Trelkovsky in The Tenant bumps heads with Stella, and in Repulsion, Carol bumps heads with her quote-unquote boyfriend. The rooms changing and things like that. And the concept of the reality versus fantasy in those two. Because Rosemary's Baby, although we may not know it until the end, everything that she believes is happening is actually happening.
Right.
In Repulsion and The Tenant, you know, it's
ambiguous.
Right,
yeah.
Right. But we can assume that in both movies, like in Repulsion, that arms aren't actually poking out of the wall. Mm-hmm. We can assume in The Tenant that, you know, his room hasn't suddenly grown huge.
Right.
Or things like that. And we can assume that the other tenants aren't actually demons as they're represented towards the end of the film. So the idea of conspiracy is in all three. The idea of paranoia is in all three. I think that with Rosemary's Baby, once we kind of figure out what is happening, then it's not really paranoia and there really was a conspiracy. So
right.
Those are the differences for me in viewing those.
I feel the same way. I think that Rosemary's Baby, specifically because she was right about just about everything, The Tenant and Repulsion are speaking more of the same language. Maybe they're all speaking the same language, but Repulsion and The Tenant are more in conversation with each other than Rosemary's Baby is with either of the two. They all have an air of paranoia about them. They all have these crazy hallucinations, but Rosemary's Baby is the one that turned out to be accurate and true, scary as it was. Whereas it's very clear that when Trelkovsky was hit by a car, the people who hit him were not the same people who owned the apartment, even though he was absolutely sure that they were. You know, there was a sequence at the very end of The Tenant. One of the owners is like, she's darting her tongue in and out like a snake. And you can see that she's clearly not doing that. She's actually pretty upset. She was a jerk throughout the movie, but she's very upset at the end. Yeah, the paranoia is far more unfounded in the other two films.
Yeah, and the only thing that really Rosemary was wrong about in Rosemary's Baby was what the conspiracy was. She thinks they want her baby for a ritual sacrifice, and it's just the spawn of Satan.
Only the spawn of Satan.
Yeah. I guess the main, since it's called the Apartment trilogy, and that's sort of a big theme, is that idea of apartment living. In Rosemary's Baby, it's more of a symbol for her womb and the constant intrusions from Minnie and her husband and making her those drinks and getting inside of her and always invading her space. And they've literally invaded her space. With Repulsion and The Tenant, it seems like it's more a reflection of their psyche as opposed
their state of
to
mind.
Their physical bodies. Although I guess in The Tenant, you could argue that it's also becomes a reflection of his body as well.
I think that in that sense, there is a big similarity with Barton Fink, where the hotel kind of it resembles hell, but it also the peeling wallpaper. It also resembles the screenwriter's deteriorating state of mind as well.
Mm-hmm.
The movie that I thought of, actually, somewhere in like the fourth or fifth revisit of The Tenant that I thought of, was a movie called Silent House. I can't remember if it's from Spain or Brazil. I'm pretty sure it's from Spain. The original movie. There was also an American remake
with the Olsen sister.
Yes,
yes,
the Olsen sister.
Mm-hmm.
That movie had something very similar, in which the inhabitants' personal hangups or baggage manifests in these surreal, aggressive forms. Yeah, Silent House was the one I kept coming back to while watching The Tenant, even though the Tenant isn't really about his past. We don't know much about Trelkovsky at all. Whereas in Silent House, the girl in the film, her is specifically some traumatic stuff that happened in her past that she ends up grappling with throughout the movie, slowly but surely. The Shining can also kind of count in that sense. There was definitely a malevolent external force, but there's also someone within this isolated space who is rapidly deteriorating, and the hotel and the interiors are, in a sense, deteriorating or crumbling or being more aggressive in response to that.
Yeah, that gets a lot of comparison to The Tenant. In the reading that I did, it came up quite often, and even though it predates it, it's kind of an interesting comparison to make if you watch them fairly close together. You kind of see those echoes in each. Along with Barton Fink, I always think of Berberian Sound Studio when I watch The Tenant, and how that has the first time I watched it, I thought, ooh, this is my new favorite Polanski movie. That change that he goes through, and the space that he's in, and how it's constantly changing. And then by the end of the movie, he's speaking in Italian and being mean and rude to the actresses and other people as everyone had been treating him up to that point. And to your point, you mentioned that we don't know much about Trelkovsky's past, and I noted that when I watched it a couple weeks ago in preparation for the show, and thought, yeah, we don't know much about him before he enters the hotel lobby or the apartment lobby.
Right.
And we don't know really anything. And I don't know if that's expressed in the novel or not. And I tried to track a copy down last year when I started to do an episode on this, and could not find one at a reasonable price, even though I think there was an edition released sometime in the 2000s. So I have not read it, and I was also curious to see if it was as faithful an adaptation as Rosemary's Baby is. So I don't know if that was expressed more in the book. All we know is that he is of Polish descent and has become a naturalized French citizen, which is, a bone of contention between him and many of the other people that he encounters in the film. I had read at some point, I don't know if it was a contemporaneous review or if it was something I found that was more modern. It referred to Trelkovsky as an alcoholic. I hadn't really thought about that before, and then when I was watching it for the show, I was like, oh yeah, he is constantly drinking or drunk. And so again, I don't know if that's explored in more detail in the novel, or if that's just part of how he deals with the world. Right. Or if it has any bearing on the things that happen to him during the movie, or the things that he imagines are happening to him.
Right. At the very least, it's not helping his mental state.
And when I watched it last, I finally watched it with the subtitles on, which ended up being very helpful and kind of cleared up a few things for me. And that was, you should always do that. Mm-hmm. If you're doing a podcast for a movie, I'm going to have to start doing that now, because some of the stuff gets lost with the accents. You mentioned earlier he gets hit by an older couple, just kind of walks right out into the street and gets hit by a car. The doctor that ends up being there by chance mentions, I think it's just a minor case of delirium tremens.
Oh, that part I didn't pick up.
Yeah, and I thought, well, that's really odd, because I've only heard that in reference to alcoholics that are
withdrawing.
And thought, okay, so maybe there is something to this alcoholic aspect of this. And if he is, although he is shown drinking quite often, not really long gaps between drinking, but if that had any bearing on what's going on in his head,
It's not something I ever noticed, an excessive amount of drinking, but now I'm gonna have to watch it an 11th or 12th time to see if.
He's just about every time he's with Stella, and they quite frequently are in either the cafe or bar or even at her apartment. He is drinking copious amounts of alcohol. So, and I know there's at least 2 or 3 scenes where he is visibly intoxicated. So,
again, not helping the mental state at all.
The other funny thing that I noticed for the first time, and this was, I think, in the notes that I sent to you, when Madame Guderian comes to his room the second or third time, I had always thought that she had diarrhea in front of all the apartment doors, and always heard it as her saying, "I have diarrhea," and "they gave me diarrhea."
They gave me diarrhea.
And when I had the subtitles on, she's saying, "They gave me the idea."
Yeah.
I had this idea, and I thought, oh my God. And so I was trying to find something online to confirm this, and I guess in the book, she vomits in front of all the doors. And he goes and picks them up, puts it in front of his door so that people don't think that he did it. And even with the subtitles on, I still could have sworn that she was saying diarrhea. So I'm admitting to being wrong on that. But I just had always, every time I watched it, I thought that is the weirdest thing to have this lady do. And
in front of every door.
In front of every door. And I mean, it's, kind of a sickly kind of baby poo, greenish brown.
Yeah.
So it didn't.
They only kind of show a little bit of it, but it's not something you want to mess with.
Madame Guderian, I think I have this in my notes as well. It was very confusing to me when Madame Diaz comes to his room with the petition to get her evicted, and mentions that, her and her son are all making all this noise, and he keeps saying that he doesn't know who he's talking about. And I thought, well, he met her earlier, but she has a daughter, and he mentions that, the daughter with the leg brace. I was always curious as to what the discrepancy was there, what it meant, or what it had to do with anything.
Yeah, I'm wondering if the answer to that might be in the book, and maybe, sometimes filmmakers, they assume that they can kind of translate a theme from the book pretty well, that was explicitly said so. I've got the movie on right now. It's just muted in the background to jog any talking points I want to bring up. And, both the woman and her daughter, and it's clearly a daughter standing in front of her, and they're doing that thing, they're begging, they're saying, they've complained about us again, and they're going to kick us out. And it's clearly a young blonde girl next to the woman with a leg brace on. Like, he sees it. The woman interacts with this young girl too, and puts her arm around her and carries her away. And so it's not like a situation where he's imagining someone who isn't there.
What it made me think of was, when does he first see her? I couldn't remember if it was when she came to his room the first time, or if it was at Simone's funeral, and ends up he sees them at Simone's funeral.
Oh.
So then it made me think, are they even there? It's just one of those ambiguous things that's not spelled out. They always kind of disappear around the corner when they leave his front stoop.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, maybe he's not really even seeing these people. Maybe that's not Madame Guderian at all, even though she is called that on the subtitles and in the credits of the film. Is that her? Is that really the woman that Madame Diaz is even speaking about? It just made me think it's more cut and dry maybe than Repulsion or Rosemary's Baby at times.
Mm-hmm.
But then I started thinking, well, maybe it's just way more vague than either of those, and nothing that he sees or has happened to him is really happening.
It also calls into question why he would specifically conjure up that image of that woman and her infirmed little girl, 2 figures that are perceived as very weak and feminine and needing help. Why would he come up with that? Why would his psyche come up with that, especially at that point in the story?
And she's also one of the few characters that has a strong accent like him. So is it an issue of this kind of xenophobia that runs through the film? he is the odd man out, and this is why everybody is attacking him and constantly haranguing him for making noise. And she's the only other person that they seem to be bothered with, so they kind of have a little coalition there of foreignness, I guess.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. Man, I've watched this movie like 10 times, and I'm still trying to uncover and put puzzle pieces together.
Well, and that's why I think it's probably more fun to rewatch than, I mean, I watch Rosemary's Baby all the time, but I don't necessarily pay all that much attention because I think I've kind of figured it out after a while. And this one is still kind of befuddling me, so it's fun to catch those little things. I think I even mentioned to you in a little note, I got to stop watching the movie because I'm going to keep picking up on stuff that I've never noticed before.
Right.
But that idea of xenophobia with Trelkovsky being Polish, this mirrors Polanski's real life, being a Polish Jew who immigrated to France, became a citizen of France, as well as the author of the book, who had the same experience. And I think he and Polanski were around the same age, kind of had the same experience during World War II of hiding out and having to escape. And it just always surprises me that this wasn't a movie that Polanski brought to the table. This wasn't a pet project of his. Originally, it was supposed to be Jack Clayton directing, and I thought, boy, this seems like right in his wheelhouse.
Exactly.
I think shortly after the novel was published, someone at Universal bought the rights and contacted Polanski, but there was miscommunication. And this was right around the time he was working on Repulsion, so I don't know if that inspired him to write Repulsion or if this is just a coincidence. But then when Jack Clayton got Paramount to buy the rights a few years later, they kind of dropped him unannounced and gave it to Polanski. But it's hard to imagine someone else doing this film with that, knowing that he has the same kind of background as the character and as the author of the novel. And
right, with this personal context, it's a very serendipitous development of events there.
That is the thing that I think is keeping him from being accepted by the people that he is now surrounded by.
Right.
And being Polish, and that comes up a number of times with the landlord, with the police when he finally goes to complain and then discovers that there are all these complaints about him. And it just sort of is the call over his experience there, being that other.
I think that's where his paranoia stems from throughout the film. Like, there's two different things, I think, at play. I think one of them is his masculinity, but the other one, I think the larger one, is his outsider status. I think the film, from what I can see, it's filled with these little microaggressions and passive aggressive ways of communicating to him that his way isn't the way things are done here, and that he isn't assimilating well enough or fast enough or deep enough. And I think that's where Choule comes in. She seems to represent his fear that fully assimilating is sort of a death of who he is, of the self, and it's like an annihilation of his sense of individuality. I did not write down the quote exactly, but he talks about when he's drunk late, somewhere around midway through the film, he talks about the moment that he stops being himself. He asks, if you cut off a limb, it's me and my limb, but if you cut off my head, is it me and my head, or is it me and my body? When do I stop being me?
If you cut off my head, what do I say? Me and my head, or me and my body? What right has my head to call itself me?
I think that for him, the moment that he stops being himself is when he has towed the line and adopted the customs and habits and attitudes of these people that he clearly resents to some degree because they resent him. The feelings of being watched, the whole Egyptology thing, I think, is something of a red herring in his head. I think that the sense of other people being able to see him and staring at him through that window across the way, I think that just ties into his feelings of being scrutinized by this community that clearly resents his presence there. So I definitely think it's mostly about his outsider status.
Which, to your point, Choule represents, since she is kind of vaguely, even for the time, represented as a lesbian. And so again, her, I mean, we're in France and things are a little bit looser over there than probably in the States at this time. But I think that equates to his otherness as well. And she didn't conform to what a quote unquote woman is supposed to be. And it's conform or die, I guess, if you're living in this apartment.
I think that he wants to be a part of the community, but he also doesn't want to be the same as these people who are clearly from the get-go. They're jerks. They're not nice people. They're not the kind of people you'd want to share an apartment with. And that's where I think some of the satire comes in. Recently, I had, just for a lark, I read Roger Ebert's contemporary review of The Tenant, and good gravy, he missed the mark entirely on this movie. He was so mad about this movie in his review. Not only that, but he laid out the film's entire ending just out of spite. Like, he put a straight up spoiler. Did you read the review?
Yes, I did. That was the one review I found. I couldn't find any other reviews from the time, but yeah, it was pretty funny.
I felt like he didn't pick up on what to me felt like Polanski's assertion that Trelkovsky's paranoia was exasperated and maybe even rooted in the fact that his apartment mates, they were pricks. The film, as dark as it is, feels satirical and seems to take aim at maybe French society at the time. And knowing what we know about Polanski himself, it makes sense that maybe he harbored some resentment over a community that may not have immediately opened their arms to him when he arrived.
Yeah, that was something that I had read years ago in a Polanski biography about what happened to him after his wife was killed in the Manson murders, and that there was a lot of resentment in the Hollywood community against him and even suspicion of him that he had taken some part in that. I think that Ebert I understand the point about how it's almost too clear that none of this stuff is really happening, but I don't think that's the point of The Tenant, like it might be in Rosemary's Baby or even Repulsion. It's most obviously all happening in his head, but why is it happening?
Right.
I still see some people saying, is the apartment itself malevolent? And I don't read it that way. So
I believe that he believes that the apartment and everyone in it is malevolent, but that doesn't, I don't think Polanski would have depicted the film the way that he does, several scenes the way that he does, without saying that, without broadcasting that things are not what he thinks they are.
Right. Like at the end with having, separate shots of the crowd being made up like demons or monsters. And then, a different angle shows that, no, they're just concerned neighbors and they may not have liked him very much, but something very horrible has happened to him and we need to get him taken care of.
Right. They're not split-tongued demons,
right.
And I think that's why that's the way he shot that. And the, it wasn't a hit and run, but the car accident sequence where he got hit. Mm-hmm. That's why those two scenes are so important. And the way that the way that they play out visually, they put a bow on it as far as saying that it's more about his mental health state than anything else.
Or even when he imagines Monsieur Z outside of Stella's apartment, and it's obviously some old salesman, so he has those instances of hallucination or paranoia.
Right. And the sequence where he felt he was being choked by her name.
Madame Diaz.
Yes, Madame Diaz. He, at first, when you're first watching the movie, that kind of looks like it could be really happening. Especially, coming off the heels of Rosemary's Baby, that seems like, okay, he could really be like ghost choked or force choked by this lady. Mm-hmm. But then, by the time the end of the movie comes around, it seems pretty clear that was probably something more like a panic attack. She's just the person that he happened to kind of project that onto.
You made a point about the Egyptology earlier being a red herring, and I had never really given it much thought. It was one of those things that just seemed like an odd inclusion in the film, and it never really connected for me, other than having the interesting hieroglyphics in the bathroom that everybody stares at him from. But in the Wikipedia entry for the film, there was a critic, Timothy Brayton from Antagony and Ecstasy, who mentioned the hieroglyphics and the Egyptology and how in the ancient Egyptian religious beliefs, they believed that everything that has happened before and is happening now and will happen later all happen at the same time. And that made me think about the time loop in the film. His point was that it didn't matter if it was Trelkovsky or Choule, Madame Choule. They're existing at the same time and the same thing is happening to them. And that was kind of intriguing to me because then it made me think that ending less of a kind of Twilight Zone ending.
Yeah.
And made it ring a little bit more true to me for some reason. And I guess we can spoil the film here, explain what the ending was.
Yeah, it came out over 40 years ago. I feel like we could spoil that one.
At the end of the film, Trelkovsky has succumbed to either his paranoia or to his malevolent neighbors and thrown himself not only once but twice out of the window, the same window that Mademoiselle Choule threw herself out of, and ends up in the hospital wrapped in bandages, just as he had seen Simone Choule earlier. When he is laying there, Trelkovsky and Stella come in just like they did earlier in the movie. So we get this idea of a time loop and that this is just going to happen again, or the same thing is happening to him that happened to her. And this was why I think one of the bones of contention with Roger Ebert. It's kind of a silly ending that doesn't really make any sense.
Right.
Which is sort of how I felt about it for a long time, but I love stuff like that. Time loop stuff. I never really gave it much thought, especially when I was younger, whether it made any sense or not. But the Egyptology idea just kind of made it maybe make a little more sense that these people who don't fit in, who don't conform, are doomed to do this, and it's happening to them all at the same time, and it doesn't matter who's in the bed and who's out of it. And I kind of like that idea.
It seems like an existential coda on the end of the movie. I do think though that as it's presented, it is for the most part in Trelkovsky's head. I think that the aggression that he's getting from his neighbors is real, but the way that he processes it all is a bit unhealthy.
Right. Yeah.
Least.
Yeah. I mean, I think that people are coming there and telling him to be quiet. They're obviously issuing complaints to the landlord and the police, but they're not demons. They're not lining up outside of his apartment and sitting in grandstands waiting for him to jump out of his window. So I guess it comes down to why is his mind doing this? Why does he believe this is happening? Maybe he's an alcoholic. Maybe it's just this pressure of belonging or being like everyone else. And failing miserably at it. He does make noise in his apartment. That's always one thing that has always kind of bugged me, even beyond having his obnoxious coworkers over. He's moving the furniture and breaks some bottles and the pipes rattle and all that stuff actually happens. But is it enough to warrant their response to that? Probably not. But why does it drive him to such an extreme? And still the question that I don't really know the answer to, did something happen to him as a kid, much like the revelation at the end of Repulsion? Why is Carol this way? Well, because more likely than not she was sexually abused as a kid. What happened to Trelkovsky? Was it the same kind of situation that happened to Polanski and Topor?
I do wonder if that one scene with Trelkovsky and the child at the park is a hint towards that. I'm wondering if at some point, maybe as a kid, Trelkovsky was approached by some stranger who called him a Jew or something like that, or something relating to his outsider status, assaulted him and walked away. I'm wondering if that could have been something that happened. And mostly I was just wondering why that scene was in the film, other than just to show his deteriorating mental state. Why a child specifically,
Well, that makes sense, actually. I never thought about it that way, but that would make sense to me.
That's the only thing I can think of. I'm sure I'm missing something, and I'm sure that many people have dissected this movie a billion times over. But yeah, that's all I can come up with as far as that scene specifically,
Mm-hmm.
which is a very jarring scene where
Mm-hmm.
he's just sitting there at the park, and the way that it's shot and the way that he's center framed, and there's just nothing but coldness around him. The texture of the scene is just frigid, and you can feel his anger and resentment at this poor kid that's just a little snot-nosed whiny kid. You see them everywhere, but oh man, he gets so angry. And the way he says filthy little brat before slapping the kid,
Filthy little brat.
it's almost in a woman's voice, isn't it?
Interesting.
It's almost as if by that time he's already kind of transitioning over to Choule or to whatever feminine avatar he's trying to look for in himself. And that kind of brings up the masculinity thing. I think that's why he aligns himself with Choule to such an extreme. I think that there are little hints of it throughout the film, but the biggest clue to me was this throwaway sequence when he's walking with Stella down the street and a guy comes up to them and begs for change. And Trelkovsky only has those large bills, to which the man just snatches one out of his hand and says, well, you wouldn't want to look cheap in front of your girlfriend here. And he just walks away with the money. And Trelkovsky doesn't really do anything about it. And he's a pretty meek, passive guy. But there seems to be, that scene seemed to speak specifically to his sense of masculinity and manliness. And I think that throughout the film, once that scene happened, I started the entire movie over. And this was like on my 6th or 7th revisit. I started the entire movie over with an eye specifically for the idea that his sense of masculinity is threatened. And it constantly is throughout the movie. Not so much with Stella. She seems to kind of help with that and make him feel more like a man in the traditional sense. But he definitely does seem to be aware of his meekness and be aware of how non-confrontational he is. And he seems to see it as a weakness in himself. And so I'm wondering if the reason why he identifies with Choule so much, despite having met her once, technically, sort of, or maybe many times in this time loop, despite having only briefly met her, he kind of identifies with her, not just because she's an outsider, but because she's a woman and because she's the fairer, weaker sex, as they used to call it.
Well, and after meeting Stella, she's the aggressor in the movie theater when they're watching the Bruce Lee film.
Right.
She seems to be the aggressor in most of their attempts at physical contact. I think finally at the end, he is the aggressor. I think that's the one time that he actually can perform. The other times he is unable to. Either he's drunk or...
Yeah, there seem to be hints of some kind of performance anxiety with him.
Yeah, which may be linked to the drinking or the cause of it, or whichever comes first. But
and the fact that while they're in the movie theater, they're watching a Bruce Lee movie with an action sequence where he's probably not feeling very tough in that moment.
And that slow change into Choule is probably one of my favorite parts of the film. And I like how that's approached, where at one point he wakes up, looks out the window at the guys repairing the broken panes of glass that Mademoiselle Choule had crashed through, and they're laughing at him. And I remember, I can think back to one of the first times I saw it, and I thought, well, what are they laughing at? And when watching it on an old VHS, it wasn't very clear that he had makeup on his face.
Right.
And then, of course, he starts wearing her dress that was conveniently left behind, and buys the wig. His nails. And I love the wig buying scene. And then he comes home with the shoes, and he's really into how he looks. And again, didn't realize until I had the subtitles on that he says at the end there, "Oh, I think I'm pregnant."
I think I'm pregnant.
Yeah, I think that he's so mentally unstable, and he starts to splinter in mind and spirit, and it makes sense that he would seek out this feminine analog to complement his own his splintering sense of self.
Even though he's only met Choule once, as soon as he moves in, everything of hers is still there. And I don't know if that's her furniture, but he really doesn't bring a whole lot. Of course, she's left her clothes. She's left a little piece of herself with the great tooth in the wall, which when I see reviews of the film or read them, that little piece of herself needed to be disposed of. That's why it's kind of possessing him, which I don't really buy into. I think it's just a weird one of those weird things that maybe doesn't have an explanation. Why did she pull her tooth out? Why does he end up pulling his tooth out? And then even when he gets robbed, everything of his that he brought was stolen, but all of her stuff is still there. And that's when he finds the books on Egyptology and some more of her stuff. That made me think, well, did he get robbed? This is when I start thinking about, are these things actually happening? Did he get robbed, or did he do this to himself?
Right. Did he destroy his own space? Did he throw out all of the things that reminded him of himself?
Because we see him destroying Stella's apartment at some point later on. And, maybe a lot more of this stuff that I thought was actually happening isn't happening. We have an unreliable narrator throughout. He's in every scene. We're seeing everything through his view, except when we kind of get those third person angles of what's really happening. So that was one of the other things that the Egyptology thing and the time loop kind of made me think about. Is this a dying hallucination of Simone Choule's? Is none of this happening to Trelkovsky? I don't know if I like that interpretation, but it just makes you think this is a lot more vague than the other entries in the apartment trilogy.
Not necessarily vague as in not thought out. It's just vague as in it seems like an orange that you just peel and peel and peel at, and the layers not an orange, maybe an onion, the layers that would be revealed to you underneath kind of depend on how you interpret the movie personally.
Not like the Ebert review would have you believe that this wasn't thought out. It's more, this is up. We're going to leave this up to the viewer. There are a lot of interpretations, I think, open.
One of the things that tends to bother me in criticism is when you see someone who takes something ambiguous about a film or something up to personal interpretation, and seeing that it's not spoon-fed to them, presents that as a flaw of the film or a fault of the film. When it's really not. It's not really anybody's fault, really. It's just it's how you interpret it, and things aren't going to be spoon-fed to you all the time. And I think a lot of great art doesn't do that. A lot of great art kind of has a conversation with the viewer in a sense, and leaves things open to interpret. God, I'm using that word a lot. Interpretation.
Yeah, I think it's a valid point, especially for the Tenant. And it's not a movie that I've watched a million times like Rosemary's Baby, so I can still get that. Had it on my 2 viewings for the show, picked up on stuff that I'd never realized before. I'm trying to think of an example of that right now.
I'm finding that with Polanski's films, with the apartment trilogy in particular, I have to revisit his films with an eye for something specific each time. One time I watched it just to look at his sense of masculinity in the film. Another time I wanted to see how the apartment itself changed and the interiors changed every time he walked into him, or every time we see him into him. Another time I watched it just to see how he's framed within glass and mirrors. And there's a whole language throughout the film that I wouldn't have caught before had I not been looking for it specifically, when it comes to just glass and mirrors. And I like films that can do that. Recently, Hereditary can do that. I'm sure I haven't revisited it yet, but Midsummer can do that. The Witch does that too. You can revisit it several times over, what we now consider to be, I guess, prestige horror. The horror that gets awards here and there.
Well, that happened to me with The Black Coat's Daughter, because I didn't care for that film the first time I watched it. And when I watched it again, I was like, oh shit, I missed so much. There are at least 2 key things that I was like, oh, I didn't even catch that the first time. And it made it so much better upon revisit. And that, I think, with The Tenant, catching those little things that maybe help with the interpretation or just open it up are what I really enjoy about revisiting the film as well. So at the beginning of the movie, when he goes to visit Simone Choule, the final shot of Choule in the bed, I believe, is actually Trelkovsky in the bed. That, to me, makes the end scene time loop deal a little bit easier to swallow, I guess. When we think about him trading places with her, and he's kind of basically already done it in his head. He's going to pretend, or he's going to fight it, not want the hot chocolate or the Marlboros that the cafe owner is constantly trying to shove in his face, and not turn into her, as he suspects that they're trying to make him do. Might not be anything. It might not be him. It might not matter, but it was the first time that I had ever even considered that it might not be her in the bed.
And I believe in both shots, in both the beginning and the end, there is a visible tooth missing, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Or, it could be the whole split personality thing. Usually in movies, I hate the split personality thing. I feel like it's a cop-out, especially when it's like a fan theory on Reddit was like, oh, he was dead the whole time, or this was his life flashing before his eyes before he died in the first 5 minutes of the movie or something like that. I can't stand those. But in this movie, the idea that there's something of a splintering of his psyche, and that half of that manifests in this other woman. This makes sense because it was clearly, not clearly, but it was ambiguously laid out from the beginning with hints here and there.
I mentioned this earlier about with the Egyptology and maybe they're existing at the same time, but maybe this is like a dying hallucination. Her kind of wish fulfillment to be with Stella finally. She wasn't able to do it as a woman, so maybe she'll have a better chance as this man.
And that makes sense too. If she was maybe like a masculine lesbian, if she was a little bit more butch, a little bit more masculine presenting, then that makes sense that in this fantasy, she's a man. And then again, why would Stella be the aggressor in that situation though? Wouldn't it be Trelkovsky? If that's an avatar for Choule, wouldn't she be the pursuer of Stella, or is Stella just naturally a sexually aggressive kind of woman? Nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying.
Yeah. It's not a perfect interpretation, so, who knows?
I do like it, though. It does make sense just as much as it makes sense that Trelkovsky wanted to be Choule. I've got the movie on, like I said, and it's muted, and I'm just getting to that part where he scoops up the bodily matter. Yeah.
One or the other.
By his door.
I swear I always thought...
I can almost smell it myself. Ugh.
I always thought she said diarrhea, and I just could never get that out of my head.
Always put on the subtitles.
They give me diarrhea.
Thank you again, Anya, for being on the show. I really appreciate you coming on. Where can people find you and your work?
I have a website with all of my clips on it, and that's anyawrites.com. But for regular work, I am on the Fangoria website, fangoria.com. I have a column there called Rated XXXY, and that is where I tackle horror from a gendered perspective. And that one is pretty regular. Every month I write about something new. This latest month, what did I write about? Oh, man, it's been such a week.
You wrote about Honeymoon.
I did write about Honeymoon. That was for Crooked Marquee.
Oh, okay,
and
sorry.
That's my that's my newest byline. Yes, I wrote for Crooked Marquee, and I just put out a piece of Crooked Marquee about Roxanne Benjamin, who is one of my favorite newer women horror directors. We wrote about her for Women in Horror Month, coming in right at the buzzer for Women in Horror Month.
She did my favorite part of Southbound.
The Siren.
Yes.
Siren short, right? Yes. I like that one. Yeah, it's my favorite. And she did. She co-wrote my favorite segment of XX. I don't know if you pronounce it XX or double X, or I don't know.
I always say XX, but I don't know what the proper way is.
And she co-wrote The Birthday Party, which is one of my favorite segments of that one. She is great, and I love how she writes very screwed up women characters who aren't just clumsy in a cutesy way, but they make some very bad decisions. And I like that. And I want more of that. So I wrote about Roxanne Benjamin's penchant for that.
And anything coming up that we can look forward to?
Let's see. Today, my review of Gretel and Hansel dropped. And on Monday, I will be putting out a review of The Invisible Man over the weekend.
And any social media you want to plug?
Probably my Twitter. That's where I tend to hang out a lot and whine about movies, and I talk about Halloween 6 a lot. Fair warning. I feel like I'm the only person who loves that movie, but I do love it. I am at Bookish Plinko, BOOKISH, Plinko, as in the game on The Price is Right. I think I was drinking wine when I came up with that. So I mean that's it now. That's my Twitter handle now. So. That's what it's at. Bookish Plinko is where you can find me.
Okay, thanks so much, Anya.
Thank you for having me.
C'est not Simone Choule. I'm Trelkovsky.
And one final thank you to Anya Stanley for being on the show. I hope to have her back in the near future to talk about more movies that we both really like. If you're interested in catching The Tenant, it is currently streaming on Amazon Prime, Hulu, Epix, and Canopy up until the end of April, I believe. Take advantage now because it does not stream very often. Thanks as always for tuning into the show. Rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes and or Apple Podcasts and or anywhere else you happen to listen to the show. Thanks so much, and don't forget,
anything can happen when you wake up heavy. Ho, 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 ho.